I'm grateful to Philip Cottrell for inviting me to participate in this really interesting day and to talk to you about sculpture at the Dublin Exhibition in 1853. Sculpture had been a popular feature of the exhibition in 1851 in London and continued to be so in Dublin in 1853. If I had known that the text was going to be so small, I'm sorry, I would put it much bigger, but I'll read it out to you. Among the artistic contributions to the Dublin Exhibition, the statuary holds a somewhat distinguished place. The sculpture was singled out by many, many writers in newspapers as a particular feature. Now, we're going to see a range of sculptures in the course of this short talk, but I want to focus particularly on four. The MacDowell Eve on the left in the screen was the most popular work at the exhibition. The one beside it, Foley's Youth at a Stream, was the most absent work from the exhibition. The German Christian Rauch, the Seated Victory, was the most influential. And the Hiram Powers, an American sculptor, The Greek Slave, was the most overlooked. So I'm picking them out for those reasons to look at how they fit into the exhibition. You're looking at, apart from the Foley, you're looking at marble versions there. These four works were all in Dublin in plaster form in 1853. I didn't say all at the exhibition, I said all in Dublin, and we'll see how that evolves. The MacDowell Eve can be singled out as being the most important because of so much was written about it at the time. The quote I have there is, "The attention of the visitor is well directed in the first place by its appointment to the first position in the centre hall, so indicating its location, to the statue of Eve, by our distinguished fellow countryman, so nationality, Patrick MacDowell." The work had been shown in London in 1851 and again in Cork in 1852. And in all these places, the quote goes on, it has been the object of the constant admiration of circling crowds of visitors. And the quote is from the Kerry Evening Post. And we'll meet that paper again. This piece of sculpture was a stunning success at the Crystal Palace exhibition in London, where it was described as a conception of consummate grace and beauty, and was said to have received unqualified admiration from both the public and the judges, and it was award-winning. We're looking at a marble version here that is in the Victoria and Albert, but the work that was shown in London at the exhibition and again in Dublin was in plaster. James Mahony's painting, which we've now seen a number of times, I have to get up here to point it out, I think. It's there in the painting. So he's including it in the Fine Art Hall. However, there's a fair amount of fiction in this painting because it wasn't in the Fine Art Hall. We know that it had a place of honour in the main building. And one account of the opening of the exhibition details how, and I quote, "Two chairs of state were placed on a dais for the Lord Lieutenant and his wife. And this is for the opening, and between them stood MacDowell's celebrated statue of Eve. Well, you couldn't get more prominent than to be between the Lord Lieutenant and his wife at the opening. So a very significant location, and not, as I say, in the Fine Art Hall. MacDowell was born in Belfast and established his hugely successful career in London, where he and his Irish peers in sculpture were widely considered to be English. The quote on the left there is a list of some of the sculptors exhibiting at the Crystal Palace in 1851. Bailey, MacDowell, Foley, Marshall, Marocchetti, and other well-known English sculptors. So all being sort of gathered into, Marocchetti was working in London. But they were reclaimed when they were, Foley and MacDowell were reclaimed when exhibiting in Dublin. We already noted that MacDowell was referred to as our distinguished fellow countryman. And here in the quote on the right, the Eve, a work of the highest artistic merit, which will be remembered in Hyde Park, and which is here very naturally claimed as native. It was as much praised in Dublin as it had been in London. The quote on the left is, "Were it the single contribution of Irish sculptural genius, the latter would have been simply vindicated by the presence of this exquisitely beautiful statue." Beauty, a constant comment about it. So why was it so admired? Well, it was so admired because beauty and grace, the obvious. But one of the elements that was singled out, in the quote on the right, was the naturalism of the figure. That MacDowell has modelled his Eve from nature and the promptings of his soul. And I love this bit. There is no sickly classicality or affected antiquism in it. So the notion that the sculptor was moving away from studying pieces of ancient sculpture, using those as models, but doing something sort of from himself and from nature. The comment could be disputed a little bit, but it's interesting that it was being picked out. We know that the fine art display was an innovation in Dublin, as it says there, an exhibition within the exhibition of unrivaled interest and value. But sculpture had the advantage of not being confined to the fine art hall. In addition to the attractions of the fine art courts, statues came to be dispersed throughout the building. And in those sculptures that were in marble and in plaster were white, obviously, so they stood out in the display. The busyness of the other displays in the various locations meant that when you had this sort of single white standing seated figure, whatever it was, you could actually really see them. The sculpture display comprised portrait statues, busts, and subject pieces sent from France, Belgium, Italy, Germany. Germany sent a lot of work in marble, plaster, zinc, and bronze. Ireland showed, obviously, at the time as part of the British display. So only those Irish sculptors who were exhibiting from a location in Ireland they're the only ones who could actually be identified as Irish. Several of the sculptures that were exhibited can be seen in locations in Ireland and beyond. We've already seen this with Fintan, the Marraketti, the equestrian Victoria, which was shown in plaster form at the exhibition and which was unveiled in Glasgow just the year after. Fintan also showed the Hogan Éireann with the bust of Lord Cloncarry. That can be found in UCD. And Hogan's Drunken Faun, which was also at the exhibition, is in the Crawford Museum in Cork. But over on the left, I'm off again, over here, I'm going to the detail of that there. You see a work by French sculptor Dieudonné, The Agony in the Garden, not his finest, which was purchased for St. Francis Xavier Church in Gardner Street, where it can still be seen today. The Vanelli works, there are two of them. This is the Fine Art Court. Sorry to have my back to you. There's the Spinario we're looking at there, and there in front is the Crouching Venus. Both works by Vanelli, both 19th century, obviously, copies from the antique. The original Spinario is in the Capitoline Museum in Rome. These were both donated to the exhibition by a Mrs. Carmichael, and they can both be seen in the National Gallery today because they moved on to that collection. Wolfe Tone, the bust by Terence Farrell, which you see on the left there, that was shown at the exhibition, and in the 1920s it made its way into the Long Library in Trinity College. And on the right, John Edward Jones' bust of a Scottish geologist, Alexander Nemo, was also shown at the exhibition. There were a lot of busts at the exhibition, and it's an extraordinary number. I still find it odd to say this. 70 of them were by Jones. Jones was born in Dublin, but he had a studio in London. So the RDS obviously gave this work to the exhibition, along with some other busts. This work, the Foley Youth at a Stream, this is a plaster version that's in the Albert Hall today. In 1853, the original plaster model of this work was in the collection of the RDS. It had been given to them by the Royal Irish Art Union in 1846. This Foley, John Henry Foley, for anyone who doesn't know, born in Dublin and had his initial sculptural training in Dublin, and then went to London, where he became the leading sculptor of his generation. And this was a really seriously important work in his career. It was one he created for a sculpture competition, which was to choose sculptors to be commissioned for work in the new Palace of Westminster. And Foley was very successful with this work, and couldn't have, sorry, I mean, I started much later. Foley was very successful with this work, and it launched his public career. There it is there at the exhibition in London, where he showed it along with 5 other works. And here it is here in the Fine Art Hall in Dublin, where it wasn't, because it wasn't included in the show. It's not in the catalogue, and it's not in the literature about the exhibition. So the RDS did not submit it to the exhibition, which was, Foley's showing in Dublin. There were 2 works by him, and it was considered disappointing that this sort of big name didn't play a bigger role. The RDS bought work from the exhibition, the MacDowell Eve, the members were very keen to buy it, and there were letters back and forth. MacDowell didn't want to sell the version in the exhibition, but he said he'd make another one, and the RDS, the managerial team, thought he was charging too much for it, so they tried to get out of it, but it was purchased, plaster. The Freken, a Belgian work, a plaster version of the Cupid Captain was also purchased for the RDS collection. And the Geiss, the Amazon Fighting, which you see there, 2 works by Geiss, actually, bronze works, were purchased for the collection. The Geiss is a small-scale version of a very, very large work by August Kiss, which is in Berlin outside the Altes Museum. And Kiss was a pupil of another of those sculptors I mentioned at the beginning, the German sculptor Christian Rauch, who showed his, the state would be showing them, it's not Rauch showing them, replicas of his victory figures from the Valhalla at Regensburg were sent to London and Dublin exhibitions, and they were immensely influential. And you can see in this is another work that the RDS bought in plaster form. And you can see there on the right a version of it in zinc in Kilruddery, County Wicklow, and in the gardens. And you can see in the centre in Glasnevin Cemetery where someone actually is using the model to create a funerary monument, and presumably, obviously, turning it into a religious figure. The quote at the top, if I can find it, we do not know, this is from a very short-lived Irish newspaper, we do not know any work to which we would so constantly point the attention of our young sculptors as Rauch's Victory. Let them study the graceful action and truthful modelling in the beautiful statue. Let them emulate its careful and perfect execution. So his victory figures were enormously influential in the 19th century. The last of the works that I mentioned was the Hiram Powers Greek slave. And I said this was the most overlooked. And the reason I said that is because this, in the mid-19th century, was the most famous piece of sculpture in America. Hiram Powers, American, had done the work in Florence and sent it back to America, where it travelled around the States and was exhibited, posters about it and publications. And it was shown in London, as you see, in 1851. And Powers sent the original plaster to the New York Exhibition in 1853, but a plaster copy of it was here in Dublin. And when there was a lot of talk about, in the newspapers, a lot of notices about it coming to Dublin and arrived in Dublin and at the exhibition, but not yet on display, there's very little comment about it after that, except when in one particular essay it was compared with MacDowell's Eve. And portion of this essay was in that Kerry newspaper that I mentioned earlier on, and then it was republished longer form in the catalogue that was published in 1854. And they were being compared. The writer, there was a lot about God and spirituality, and then the writer gets on to the issue of nakedness and nudity in sculpture, and is insistent that it must be necessary to the story that's being told, and decides in the end that it is absolutely necessary to the story, the legend of Eve, but not so to the Greek slave. This is a Greek woman being sold by the Turks at a slave market during the War of Independence. The writer goes on, while recognising that the Greek slave was beautifully modelled and may even be a finer work than the MacDowell, nakedness in this instance positions it below the level of high art, so takes it down off its pedestal and simply dismisses it. A work that simply just didn't get the attention it deserved. There's a difference between them as well in relation to the models that they're using. Again, the Eve being deemed to be more modern, and the Powers obviously working from ancient sculptures. These are, so the four ones that I showed you at the beginning, all in plaster form in Dublin in 1853. Three of them in plaster form at the exhibition, one of them not. Three of them, the three on the left, all in the RDS, two purchased in the exhibition, one already there. And sadly, they're no longer there. Fintan said earlier about an image, he said, ignore the plasters at the back, the photograph of the museum. And I'd say we've ignored the plasters in Dublin at our peril. We have lost an awful lot of them. So sadly, those works are no longer there. These early art and industry exhibitions gave Irish sculptors the opportunity to shine on an international stage. The quote is, some Irish sculptors rank with the most renowned artists of Europe, among whom MacDowell and Foley are universally acknowledged as of the heads of their profession. And by the next London exhibition, it was being stated that the best British sculptors are Irishmen. Thank you.